fishing or boating, you need water. And one of the really exciting things that many people don't know about Pennsylvania are the abundance of waterways that can be found in Pennsylvania. As you see on the screen here, and I'm not going to read all of these, but we have over 2,300 impoundments with 200,000 acres of water. We have 76 natural lakes. We have 63 miles of Lake Erie shoreline. And it goes on and on and on. And one of the things that I find to be really interesting, and you might want to jot this down, just in case you would ever, get on Jeopardy, for example, or anything like that. We have 85,000 miles of rivers and streams. And if you can't, like envision in your mind, like how much is 85,000 miles of rivers and streams? That is enough to go around the earth 3.5 times. So again, wow, mind blown. That's just how many rivers and streams we have. And you add in all of these other waterways, we are second only to the state of Alaska in the amount of waterways that can be found. So when you think of like a state of like Texas, for example, that's so much bigger than us, and then you compare, Pennsylvania to that, we are second only to the state of Alaska in the amount of waterways that we have. We are so blessed with the abundance of waterways. There are people who come not only from across the country, but from around the world to Pennsylvania just to be able to fish and boat in our waterways. So as members of this great Commonwealth, we are, certainly just so lucky to have this opportunity right in our back door that we can go out pretty much just anywhere in a local area and go fishing or boating. So keep that in mind and remember the answers to that for that Jeopardy if you ever get on there. So we were talking about the abundance of waterways. Well, what can you find in an abundance of waterways? Well, boundless fish. You have abundance of fish from panfish, such as the bluegill there, catfish, et cetera, et cetera. We have the brook trout there, that beautiful brook trout that is in that lower right-hand corner of the picture there, yellow perch, et cetera, et cetera. We have so many different types of fish that you can go fishing for. And, of course, this evening we are talking about steelhead. So we're going to focus on that this evening. Next slide, please. So again, we have the great Commonwealth in which we live. We have the abundance of water. We have the abundance of fish. And then the next great thing is that here in Pennsylvania, just because of our location, we can fish any season. We can fish year round, whether it's, spring, for trout, winter ice fishing. We can fish anytime. We can fish day or night. And we can certainly fish any place we can choose, from streams to lakes, to ponds, to rivers, to reservoirs. It's just, we are so lucky that we can do this. And really, next slide, please. And the reason that we can do that is because we have, a very special ticket. It's not a ticket to the movies. It's not a ticket to the theater. We have the Pennsylvania fishing license, in which that is our ticket to be able to go fishing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year for the price of just one fishing license. So again, if you have already purchased one, that's great, and we thank you and we appreciate that. If you're getting ready for that December 1st rollout for the next year's fishing, where you could, if you purchase it on December 1st, you can get 13 months of fishing for 2023. That's something you want to mark your calendars for. Right here on this particular slide, these are the prices for 2022. Be very similar for 2023, but if you haven't done it yet, and you can go to a local fishing license agent, We have many vendors that are out there, but we also have the convenience of the online Huntfish PA store at huntfish.pa.gov, where you can purchase not only your fishing license, but you can also purchase your kayak launch permits, and you can also renew your boat registrations, all in the convenience of your living room. So if you haven't already checked out the Huntfish PA online store, you can do that as well. All right, next slide, please. So with that, that's the end of our welcome and introductions. And I am going to turn off my camera, and this evening's presenter, Chad Foster, will take it away from here. I do see that we have some other new people who joined us. Please make sure your cameras and microphones are off. And if you have not already done so, please type in your first and last name. I want to take attendance. I want you to get that email. All right, take it away, Chad.
Thanks, Dee. Like I said, thanks everyone for attending. SteelHead Fishing in Erie, Pennsylvania, from about September through April every year is a multi-million-dollar industry. Over the next few slides, we'll talk about just why and how much revenue is generated by one species of fish that inhabits Lake Erie for about 6 to 8 months of the year, and then spends the rest of its time inland, in the different creeks and waterways that flow off of Lake Erie. So what is a steelhead trout? It's a lake run rainbow, genetically speaking. Their nicknames are silver bullets, chromers, silver shadows. Steelhead trout spend most of their life in Lake Erie, and they return to the tributary streams to spawn each fall or spring. Steelhead stocking started in the late 1980s. One of the reasons why is because we used to stock the coho salmon. The one downfall with the coho salmon is it is a salmonoid, and they are born and one thing on their mind, to reproduce, and their offspring are let go and they die. Steelhead can return back to Lake Erie and put on some pounds by eating the amount of forage that in Lake Erie is just astronomical right now. That's why we have such a big walleye push. That's why the smallmouth bass fishing is excellent, as well as lake trout fishing. There's plenty of food for these fish to eat. Steelhead can potentially get 6 to 8 pounds. 10 pounds plus is definitely common. The state record was caught in the early 2000s. It's still the state record to this day at a little over 20 pounds. It was caught in one of the east side streams, so you don't have to fish Elk Creek or some of the larger streams. Those smaller streams hold big fish just like the larger streams. Most of the lifespan for steelhead trout is anywhere from 6 to 8 years. Obviously, it depends upon how many times they're able to run in and spawn and get back out of those creeks until they get back to the lake. So the daily limit is 3 steelhead from basically September through to the first day of trout. Minimum size is 15 inches. So let's talk a little bit about what makes a Pennsylvania steelhead and how does the Fish and Boat Commission culture steelhead. So first of all, we want to talk a little bit about aquatic invasive species. We do our very best at preventing aquatic invasive species from coming into our hatchery systems. So one of the things we do is, anybody know out there where this picture is taken? I'm sure several of you, if you've been to the Erie area, would say this is the area at Trout Run, and you would be correct. This is where we capture all of our broodstock steelhead to take them back to the Fairview hatchery. The reason why that dam was created there is to prevent the fish from flowing up into Trout Run. Trout Run feeds our hatchery system at Fairview, so we don't want any diseases, any aquatic invasive species to get into our hatchery system. So we prevent our steelhead from coming anywhere near our hatchery. So the steelhead collection, that takes place at Trout Run, anywhere are from November through January. Fish and Boat Commission employees collect steelhead when they are ready to spawn, and they are taken from Trout Run. It's a nursery water, so it's off limits to fishing. You can fish in the lake at this area, you just can't fish in any part of the stream that flows into the lake. So a little bit about the hatchery process. These brood stock or adult steelhead travel from the Trout Run to the Fairview State Fish Hatchery. Once they are at the hatchery, they're offloaded from those trailers into the raceways. Once they are in the raceways for generally a week, we take those fish back out of the raceways. They are put in those blue buckets with anesthetic in them. It calms the fish down. We're able to handle them a lot easier. Each fish is individually weighed, measured, and sorted according to sex, and then they are ready to spawn. When we spawn steelhead, approximately 4,000 green eggs come from one female. We generally put 2 females in one colander and use the milk from one male to fertilize those eggs, and then we release those fish back into those covered raceways, allow those fish to recover, and then those fish are returned back to a Lake Erie stream within about a week's time of staying in the hatchery. Once those fertilized eggs are then transported to the Tynesa State Fish Hatchery. So they each have numbered egg lots. They are placed in an egg battery jar. In about 26 days, these eggs hatch. Then they are taken to the Lineville State Fish Hatchery. 25% go there. The other 75% go back to Fairview until they are grown in about 14 months to stocking size. At Fairview and Tynesa, these are where we grow and raise all of our fingerling steelhead. Once they reach 7 inches, they are the size that they can imprint. What imprinting means is when we stock these fish, they are genetically taught at that size, just through genetics mainly, to know where they had been released at, so that in approximately a year and a half to 2 years, those fish come back in from the lake and try to come to the exact same spot at which we stock those fish at. Sometimes it happens, most of the time it does. That's why we hope that most of our fish stay in Pennsylvania waters. They don't wander over to Ohio, they don't wander to New York. We try to keep most of those fish here for the anglers and the boaters that have funded the Steelhead program by your support of the trout and Lake Erie permits. So once they are 7 inches, most of the time in the spring time of the year, approximately 14 months after they were collected, the steelhead smolts are stocked at 7 inches. And then what happens? Now you know the rest of the story. These fish can grow, upwards of 30 inches in length. Some are 35 inches in length. Can grow to, 6 to 8 pounds, if not further. We saw several in the 12 to 15 pound range last year. Just a lot of fight in these fish, a lot of fun on light tackle, whether you're using a fly rod or if you're using a noodle rod and spin fishing gear. We'll talk about both of those shortly. I did see a question come in. There's really not much natural reproduction going on. I would say there's some, but it's very small percentage, probably less than 0.1%. Most of the fish that return are the ones that we've stocked as smolts. Great question, by the way. So where do we find steelhead? We'll talk a little bit about that right now. Ari will talk a little bit about that when she goes over her sections coming up. So Lake Erie tributaries, that's where we're going to find the elusive steelhead. It's among the best trophy steelhead fisheries in the world. We, the Fish and Boat Commission, stock 1 million juvenile steelhead each year, and some of the best times to fish for steelhead in the streams are early fall through early spring. This is the months from basically September through early to mid-April. There's several popular tributaries. Basically, you're talking Elk Creek, Walnut Creek, 20 Mile, Crooked Creek. There's several different streams and tributaries that these fish call home. It's a popular destination for national as well as international anglers. If you go up there, especially October, November, and December during the height of steelhead season, you'll see vehicles from Texas, you'll see vehicles from Montana, you'll see vehicles from Ontario, you'll see vehicles from almost every state in the U.S. People come in from all over the world to catch these fish as well. It's nearly 250,000 steelhead fishing trips each year, and this number was generated by a creel survey the Fish and Boat Commission did back in 2003, that it put the economic activity of the steelhead trout in Pennsylvania at $15 million for the Erie community. Like I said, that's 2003 data. If we are using 2022 data, that's probably in the neighborhood of 25 million, if not close to $30 million of economic activity is due to this one fish that inhabits Lake Erie. With all of that fish, with all that pressure, with all the anglers out there, one of the biggest challenges that we face as an agency is addressing the increased demand on both public and private land. So, if you learn anything from tonight, we hope that you learn that, where we can go, what we are trying to do with easements up there. We're trying to get more people fishing, spread out the amount of anglers on a particular water body the best we can, and just to prevent those landowner interactions as best as possible. If you're looking to look for an area where to go, you're new to steelhead fishing, download the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission app. It's free. Look up Fish Boat PA on your app. If it's an Apple product like an iPhone, iPad, anything like that. Android has their own as well. Just look up Fish Boat PA app and download it. You can get the Northwest Region Report. You can see what's going on in Northwest Pennsylvania. You can actually see where the easements are, and they'll take you right to those. So it's also referred to, the Erie streams are referred to as Steelhead Alley. Walnut Creek is one of the main access areas where there's a lot of anglers go and target steelhead from. Elk Creek, you've got the American Legion hole, and you got plenty of public fishing access areas. You can find those on our Fish and Boat Commission app. East side streams are smaller in width as well as in the amount of fish they carry, but those are 4, 7, 8, 12, 16, and 20 mile. If you're looking to go and try something different, or if the creeks are blown out, or it's early this time of the year, you can always go to the mouth of Trout Run. If it's a south blowing wind or very calm day out there, there'll probably be plenty of people fishing at the mouth of Trout Run. And then always ask permission to fish before fishing private property. It is very well marked as far as what is public and what is private, and just expect to deal with landowners up there if you're in an area where you're not supposed to be. So this chart does a great job of showing the pink line is the amount of steelhead trips anglers go up, as far as the catch rate is the blue line. So there will be a lot of trips made in October and in November, but really the catch rates are down comparatively. If you're looking to late November through early January, the amount of anglers will be down, but your catch rates might be even better. So keep that in mind. My personal favorite time to go steelhead fishing on the tributary streams are definitely November and December. Those are my favorite months. That's when I do my best up there. It just depends on the conditions. If you can find it when it's a rise in the water or a drop in the water, definitely have had really good days up there. So let's talk a little bit about the brown trout fishery, and then we'll hand it over to Ari and continue with the rest of the presentation. So back in 2008, we started stocking brown trout in addition to the steelhead complement. We tried to stock around 100,000 brown trout each year. That way we can provide more fishing opportunities. Brown trout like to come in when the steelhead come in. It adds diversity to the Erie fishery, and it enhances the offshore summer boating fishery. About 2 years ago, one of the boats up on Lake Erie did catch the new state record brown trout, and it was caught out while he was trolling offshore for walleye. So, there's a bunch of big brown trout in Lake Erie now. They're definitely out there with the walleye, and they definitely enjoy to come in when those steelhead come in this time of the year. So with that, it's now Ari's time, and I'll let her take over.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks very much for joining us this evening. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and Dee will make sure that I get to them if they're not already answered as we progress. That being said, we're focusing on Lake Erie steelhead fishing. There's a steelhead fishery in all of the Great Lakes, which is pretty spectacular, but we're going to be focusing specifically on our section of Steelhead Alley. Unfortunately, we are missing my compatriot Ryan Novotny. He was noted on the former slide, but he's actually who really helped to get this put together and help get me involved as well. A little bit more about myself. I have lived in Erie my entire life. I've always been fishing. I just didn't start fly fishing until I got to Allegheny College. I was involved in the outing club there, and I met a couple of people that thought I was loony for not steelhead fishing in the tributaries. They thought it was wild. I would just go trolling in the lake when there was 8 months of the year you could go chase them in the creeks. Next slide, please. Okay, so first we're going to talk about our setup. First and foremost, with what we're going to be teaching you technique-wise, we highly recommend using a medium action fly rod. There's a graphic right on that slide, and it actually shows you what I'm talking about when I say medium action. That's how much bend you're going to get in your fly rod. Traditional old school bamboo fly rods, those would be a full action fly rod. That's going to bend all the way down to the grip. That's not necessarily what you're looking for with steelhead fishing. It's good to use a medium action rod because it's forgiving for your casting. It's going to really protect that tippet well. And the other reason is that the fast action rods that are marketed today, a lot of them are really a moderate fast action rod. Not all of them are truly a fast action. So really right now what we're seeing is a push towards fast action fly rods. A medium action is great. That's the flex that I prefer for steelhead fishing. And just as the slide says, I think it gives you enough backbone to cast, but there's a little bit more play with it, and it's a lot more forgiving. There's rod brands noted down at the bottom, and yeah, perfect. And we can go to the next slide, please. We'll hop right on to the reel section. Any of the brands at the bottom here are fabulous. I started out with Redington, but obviously Orvis has a phenomenal free fly fishing program available on their website. So if you want to read even more detailed information when we get done, they do actually have a Great Lakes Steelhead blog on there. Back to the reels. So we're talking probably a 10-foot 7-weight medium action fly rod. You're going to want a large arbor reel because these fish, as quickly as they're gonna peel off line and go the absolute opposite direction of you, they're going to come flying right back at you, and you need to be able to pick up that line quickly and efficiently. Even more important, in my opinion, than having a large arbor, because I don't really have a very, very large arbor. I mean, I'm not using one of those big Reddington rise reels that have a huge arbor regardless of what weight it is. I pay attention to the drag system. There's a number of different drag systems that are out there, and I don't really want to get lost in the weeds of what is best or what I use. But I highly recommend trying to have a sealed drag system, especially because a lot of the times that you're going to be coming up here fishing, it's probably going to be snowing or very, very cold or threat of snow, and you want to make sure that you have a good drag system that's not going to freeze up on you when you finally hook into a fish. One thing that Ryan feels is very important, and I've started to pay a little bit more attention to this, is trying to balance the size of your reel against your fly rod. Okay, you want to make sure that you have a decent balance between the fly rod and the reel. You don't want to have a reel that feels super duper light, because that is going to feel a little bit odd to you. Next slide, please. Okay, and then now we're on to the line. So we talked rod, we talked reel, now we're going to line. Just want to remind everybody that having some backing on your reel prior to the fly line is always a good move. You're not going to hit it every single time you come up to Erie, but when you do hook into that fish that starts peeling off your floating line, you want to make sure that you've got some backup on there. As to lines, I recommend a floating fly line. What you can see on the graphic on your screen, it says WF5F. The WF stands for weight forward, and then the F after the 5 is for floating. Don't ever be afraid to ask somebody in the store when you're going to go buy fly line what exactly you're buying, what it is. Everybody's going to be more than happy to help you. And then as a female, when I actually ask questions such as this, everybody is more than happy to explain what's going on to me. I've had good experiences pretty much everywhere I've gone and asked the questions. Back to your floating line. I recommend either a 6, 7, or 8 weight. So as we were talking on the rods, and as you saw on that slide there, a 6, 7, or 8 weight is going to be a good move. I personally use a 7 weight most of the time. One thing that's noted on this slide that's very important is that the color equals dull, okay? I highly recommend trying to get a dull color fly line. If you go out there and you're using like a fluorescent orange fly line, you may start to notice that you're not having the results that you expected. I think that trying to use like a dark green or a darker color floating line is a good move. But if you do have a bright colored fly line, that's not a big deal. Maybe just lengthen up your leader if you notice there's some issues. Another reason we recommend floating line up here in Erie, everybody, is that our creeks are pretty shallow. In addition to that, the creeks that we do have that are a little bit bigger and deeper, they're not going to have the flow that's really necessary for you to use a sinking line. There are some places that you might benefit from a sink tip line, but a floating line is going to be your best bet, especially with the setups that we're about to go into. Next slide, please. All right, fly fishing setup, your leader. This is very important, but I think that it's very easy to get bogged down in the technicalities of it, okay? More or less, you want a 9-foot leader. Your leader length can be all the way down to 7.5 feet. It could be 11 feet. It could be longer than that, though that will be hard for you to cast and land a fish with. I typically use a 9-foot leader. Now, as to leader tippet weight, you see we have 3X to 5X in here. I'm going to be very frank with everybody. If I can go up I go up as far as I can. That means that I go up to 1x sometimes. If I'm fishing a streamer, I need the 1x. If you go down to the 5x, you're going to have a lot of hookups. You're going to have to really play that fish and be patient. Okay, when you're using 5x, depending on what brand that you're using, I mean, you're down into a few pounds of test against this fish that spends years out in the lake swimming wherever it wants, and it's really not used to having a hook in its mouth. So that 5x tippet is really going to make you work it. Down at the bottom is where we actually have a great graphic that's going to explain to you what we mean when we say a tapered leader. Okay, so up on the left-hand side, you see what we call the butt section. Most of the time, if you're getting, say, a Rio store-bought tapered leader, the butt section over to the left, there's going to be a loop on it. And that's going to be the thickest part of your leader. Obviously, it's going to taper down to what the actual leader tippet weight is. Okay, so when you pull out the 5x leader, it's not that light all the way up at the top. It is thicker up there because if you don't have that thicker butt section, it makes it a lot harder for you to really present your fly all that well. For those of you that fish for bass with a fly rod, you know what I'm talking about with having a thicker butt section so that you can really flip things over. As to like what type of leaders, I just if you like a specific brand, use that brand, but pay attention to the prices because you know you might be paying more for that. You might be paying more for the exact same Rio leader that has SteelHead on it than the exact same type of fluorocarbon leader that's just their generic packaging. So I know that I have a tendency to really take a peek at marketing, so don't be afraid to really step back and take a look at what the heck you're buying. I believe, next slide, please. Perfect. Okay. I knew Ryan had this slide in here. Ryan loves to build his own leaders, and I think that that is awesome. So what Ryan will do is he will actually just buy whatever pound test he knows he wants that butt section to start with, and he'll eventually build it down from there, okay? But focusing on this slide that we've got right in front of us, he has a little bit more details of what size tippet he's using based off of conditions. Ryan and I have different personal preferences. I really like being in control of the fish, and I think that Ryan seems to really like having the fish let him know that he's got to work it to put that fish in the net. Low and clear water, you're definitely using 5x tippet if you wanna hook into fish. But if it's high and stained, 3x is my minimum. Sometimes I'm using 2x. If you're using a loop knot on your flies, you can get away with using a heavier strength line on them. Now, as to techniques where he's kind of more so delineating what sort of leader we're going to be using. If I'm stripping streamers, that better be a brand new 3x leader that I'm using. Again, I'm going a lot stronger than that. I have some buddies that are guides, and if they're putting on those huge Blaine chocolate inspired streamers that are probably like $15 worth of materials, they're using 20-pound tests, sometimes 25-pound tests, depending on where they're fishing in Erie for steelhead. However, most of the time, you're going to put way more fish in the net by nymphing. So you are going to be using that 4x tippet. Next slide, please. Okay, fly fishing setup. Perfect. So this kind of goes a little bit more into what pound test we're dealing with, and then it actually is going to talk about line diameter a little bit. Now, when it comes to line diameter, it's actually pretty important to pay attention to that. One thing that I've noticed over the years of fishing is that I can compare two different brands, and it might be 4x tippet, both of them, but I might have different pound test on there, or very rarely you might notice that your line diameters might be different based upon brand. Generally speaking, this is the way that it is. I believe that Orvis as well has a chart that breaks this down, but when we say 0x, about 14 and a half pounds worth of test on there. When I say 3x, that's 7.5 pounds of test. And so that's why when I say, you know, you could be using 20-pound test for streamers, I mean, you absolutely could. Do you have any questions so far?
Not yet, Ari. Oh, well, here comes one. I'm sorry. One just popped in. Scott is asking, how do you like to attach the tippet to the floating line?
The way that I'm going to be, so it depends. The way that I'm going to be attaching it 9 times out of 10, Scott, I'm buying these tapered leaders that actually have a loop near the butt section. So I have a loop-to-loop connection going between the end of my fly line and my tapered leader that'll typically go down to like 3x tippet. Most fly lines that you purchase these days are going to have a welded loop at the end where you can attach your tapered leader. A loop-to-loop connection is just really handy, but I know plenty of folks that, yep, they prefer a direct leader connect. A lot of folks that I fish with, that I fly fish with, especially people that I learn from, they use a nail knot to connect directly. So they'll use a nail knot from their leader right onto the end of their floating line. They'll cut off the welded loop even if it comes with that. Right. And as to tippet rings rock, but you're actually better off with the micro swivel. The tippet rings are very handy for sure, but I find that they're harder to tie on than a micro swivel, and you don't have to worry about any twist with the micro swivel. I know a lot of people that use tippet rings, and they don't have issues with line twist. I suppose it's just personal preference that I'm going to be using a micro swivel. Direct connections and loop-to-loops, I think that's kind of where we're just fishing, right? So you can use whatever connection you want. If I'm like really trying to put a fish into the net, I'm probably going to eliminate the loop-to-loop and go direct. Okay, we are going to get into indicators shortly here, David. So I'm going to keep trucking along because I know everybody's interested in the rigs. This is the leader formula, and this is what Ryan actually uses as well. So this would be purchasing the pound test you want, probably on those big old spools that most people are familiar with, and then cutting the sections you want, tying them together. Blood knot and surgeon knot. Those are great knots, and those are really what are going to help you to be able to lengthen your leader or adjust it, or even be able to add additional flies onto your leader, okay? Say you have this entire setup, and then you see your fly down there at the bottom right. Say that wasn't a dry fly. Let's say that was a copper john, and then you wanted to like drop an egg after it. You could tie onto the bend of that hook, or you could do a surgeon's knot above it, and then use one of those tag ends. And then as well, there's another direct connection. Next slide, please.
That just fucking blows.
Excuse me, please, for our audience. This is Dee, your chat wrangler speaking, and I'd like to remind you all that you need to keep your microphone muted. We don't want to be hearing your sidebar conversations if we possibly could. Thank you very much for your consideration, and if you do have any comments to make, please type them into the chat box. Thank you so much. We're so glad that you're here with us this evening. Continue, Ari.
Thank you, Dee. Hey, we're going to get to spin fishing if you guys can just hang with me. I know that not everybody on here is a fly angler, but Chad is going to talk to you about how he himself fishes for steelhead here shortly. Okay, flies. This is my favorite thing to talk about. There's many different flies that you can use. Generally speaking, for steelhead, it's going to be far more important that you don't spook the fish and you give them a good, clean, drag-free drift. Those are more important than any fly that you're going to put on the end of your line. That being said, we have listed some great flies on here for you. The ever classic woolly bugger is absolutely going to put a steelhead in the net for you. You can fish with very large spay-inspired flies, like that fly in the bottom right over there, all the way to what we'll get to on the next slide, nymphs. Now, one thing with streamer fishing, everybody, I know that it's a lot of fun to just rapidly strip streamers, but I usually have the most success by swinging them downstream and across. I will strip once I get to the end of my drift. I am going to strip up a little bit. You'll be surprised how many fish are actually going to follow you all the way across the stream, and then when they see that little movement at the end, that's when they're going to grab you. So if you're fishing streamers, fish them all the way till you think it's like way too shallow, and then don't be afraid to give them a couple active strips. But the way that I fish streamers is different than how I fish for smallmouth bass. It's not going to be quite as aggressive. And then also one last thing before we hit the next slide, everybody. You can use streamers all year round. It doesn't matter how cold that water is. All that means is that you need to slow that fly down, okay? As the temperatures really start to decrease, as soon as those water temperatures really start to cut down on us, these fish are not going to be willing to move as much for a fly. That doesn't mean they're not going to eat a 3-inch streamer. That just means that you need to figure out how to present it to them better. That means going much slower. That means crawling the bottom or practically doing so. Give it a go. Next slide, please. Okay, nymphs. Nymphs are very versatile. You can make them look just about any way you want. There's very popular Perdigon style nymphs now that are very sparse and basic, even more sparse than that copper john that you see on the bottom right. Now, just like streamers are imitating bait fish, these nymphs are going to be imitating insects in the stream. What's pretty cool about Erie is that although we don't necessarily have those storms of insect hatches, we do have pretty good bug life going on. In the winter time, if you're ever on the stream and you see what they look like, these little tiny flies on the edges, they're actually little black stone flies that are hatching. So if I could give everybody on here one hot tip with nymphs, a really small black stonefly is a very good fly to fish. There's also a popular fly in the area called the wiggle stone. It's a stonefly, but it's a two-part fly. So the bottom part, excuse me. It's a two-part fly, so it's actually practically hooked together. So the bottom part, you can actually see it wiggle when it's in the water. Carl Wexelman is actually who showed me that, but I believe Matthew Sapinski, that'd be a good guy to look up. I want to say that that's his original fly pattern. He's a really well-known Michigan fly guide, but the wiggle stone fly. Some other types of nymphs that are listed over here, all of those are great. I am a big fan of the copper john, just because it gets right down to the strike zone, okay? That's one thing I do really want to harp on now that we're into nymphs. Mob fly. Heck yeah, mob fly. Any color mob fly. Anything that looks like a crane fly, you'll catch fish up here. Seriously, anything that remotely resembles a crane fly, really good fly to use up here. But back to what I was saying with the nymphs, okay? If you have a good rig and you're like, this is such a fishy spot, and you've put a few good drifts in there, like we're talking, you're like, I threw a mend in, it was drifting a little bit slower than the leaves on the surface, so I know it was down where it needed to be, like I don't get it. maybe put on a split shot. Sometimes you need to get a little deeper than you think you need to get. So again, that's why I'm a big fan of using beadhead nymphs or copper john nymphs. All right, mid-season fly menu. This is awesome the way that we're talking because I mean, you'll notice that this is the time that mid-November is the time that people are really fishing eggs and you're really going to see results with it. On to the different egg patterns. There's a bunch of different egg patterns. One that's very popular in our area, and I actually believe it started Great Lakes steelhead fishing, with steelhead fishing in the Great Lakes, is the crystal meth fly. That's the green fly that you see on the left in the middle over there. It's like a flashy material, and there's all kinds of different colors, green, blue, pink. I do recommend trying to pay attention to if the water is stained or not. Okay, if the water is like super duper clear, then using a big gaudy chartreuse egg may not necessarily be the move that day. If it were a day where you can really see through the water column, I'm probably maybe going to go with that nuke egg on the right, or even the sucker spawn looks like it's a right above it on the right hand side, top column. That as well would be a good fly. Just something with a little more muted colors, and something that isn't necessarily going to be so attention grabbing. Now, when the water's dirty and stained, definitely use that bright, big, gaudy stuff. But I'm a big fan of using smaller, more natural looking food items when I can. One thing on here that I think is something I really want to highlight is the blood dot eggs. I have seen many varieties of those. I think that it's a really great egg to use. If you were to listen to Jeff Blood talk about how he came up with that pattern, it's from seeing basically dead eggs in the stream and observing what eggs really looked like. And he wanted to make a fly that looked like that. And when they get wet, I mean, they very much look lifelike. Oh, one thing that's not on this list that I've just noticed is that what's called a clown egg. It's something that I didn't know about until I actually joined the PA Steelhead Association, and I went fishing with somebody in the association, and I asked what the heck that egg was in its fly box because it was like 6 different colors. If you are drifting through a pool and you put split shot on and you're still not catching, and then now you've switched what fly you're using, and it's like still not the color egg that they want, try a clown egg. Sometimes the menagerie of all the colors, and it'll look like a glow bug. So that fly that we see in the top left, that egg fly, basically imagine that being all of the colors of the rainbow all smashed up together. Those catch fish. It's pretty cool. Scud hook is the traditional hook that folks are tying these on. I think 10 is really big. I'm usually using like a 12 or a 14, to be honest with you. If I'm going to be tying some blood dot eggs for springtime on elk, I'm actually going down to like a 14 or a 16. All right, this is very important. This is the late season fly box, okay? So we're talking early March to mid-May. This is a really a wild time of year for fishing for steelhead, okay? You could be catching drop back steelhead that are going to eat literally anything that's in front of them. There might be, oddly enough, some like bright chrome fish in the system. Just about anything's in there. So if you trout fish with it, if you smallmouth bass fish with it, don't be afraid to give it a go. I talked to somebody on the stream last year. He had an egg in the front, and then it was a chartreuse and white Klaus or minnow in the back. It was something I hadn't seen before. He had a great day, caught a bunch of fish. Now, one thing on here that I do want to mention is the worm patterns. There's many different worm patterns these days. You can get like a silicone type of silly worm. There's the traditional San Juan worms with the chenille. I personally find that using the large silicone, like squirmy ones, I actually have a little bit more success with than the traditional San Juan worms. But that being said, worms are always a good move. If it's rained a lot and like the water's up or starting to drop a little bit, don't be afraid to put on a mop fly or a worm fly. Something that very easily could have been washed down off the banks and is going out into the lake right now. Additionally, don't be afraid, and this might seem goofy because I mean you're not out on the Madison, but don't be afraid to flip some rocks and see what's going on in there. Sometimes you'll flip a rock and you'll see something that looks really goofy. Like I thought I saw a sow bug on the bottom of a rock last year and tried to put on an imitation of that. So something really small and buggy, and I hooked up right away. So sometimes using something that's a little bit different than the guy next to you is really all that it takes. A lot of these fish have seen a lot of different presentations, especially by March. Okay. These are great rules of thumb. So if it's a low clear day, small natural colored flies. Now size 12 or less, 12's general size. You can talk to. One second, Dave. As to sizes 12 to 14 and 16, those are like general sizes. I have talked to folks that have fished a size 22 midge, and it sounded like it was a really extensive fight, but they brought a fish to the net with that. So if you want to use midge fly because it's really low and clear, and you think that dropping a midge off a dry fly would be a good move, do it. Give it a go. We're just fishing. This isn't a competition. I think the vast majority of you are not getting paid to do it. So don't be afraid to experiment a little bit, okay? As to the dry dropper rig is a phenomenal rig if it's very low and clear water, okay? There's a term in Erie, we call it gin clear. It's actually as clear as looking through that bottle of gin. Dry fly fishing is not very productive in our neck of the woods. It's not going to be like going out and fishing for West Coast steelhead. Sometimes, though, conditions permit for you to skate a dry fly for steelhead, and they will come up and take it. But I have only seen that once, and I have never successfully done that myself. When I did see it, it was a bomber-style dry fly. When I use a dry dropper rig, I'm going to be using a size 6 Kaufman stimulator, and then my typical go-to is actually a beadhead caddis imitation that I'm dropping off the bend of the hook. I'm not going to discount people getting steelhead on dry flies, but you're more likely to see them come up and swipe at your indicator than you are for them to come up to the stimulator if you're floating a dry dropper rig through there. But don't be afraid to give it a go. Fall's your best time for being able to do that. You're going to really need to be able to look at the behavior of the fish. If you do see that there's some fish in the tail out of the pool and it's a nice fall day and they seem to be pretty active, don't be afraid to wake that dry fly a little bit and see if they'll chase it. If you get a chase but not a hit, don't be afraid to keep going. All right, and then off to Chad to talk about noodle rod and spin gear.
Yeah, I'll be short and brief here, guys and gals, but my favorite time of the year is to go up there in the fall and fish for the steelhead with super light line, with a noodle rod and a spinning gear setup. So, what are we looking for? Do you need to go out and buy one your first trip up? I would say no, but if you're up there, you can go to several of the different bait and tackle shops that pretty much run from one side of the state on the Ohio line to New York line, and stop in at some of those tackle shops. They've got great deals on a noodle rod and a spin fishing setup. 40, 50 bucks, 60 bucks now for a combo with spinning reel. You're going to need some line, your hooks and your bait, and you can go fishing after that. So, like I said, you don't need it, but one of the advantages of a noodle rod is it takes the fight out of the fish. Just because you have a longer rod, you can use lighter line, and you can catch and land more fish. Generally, I like to use an 8-foot 6 to a 10-foot 2-piece rod. Medium light to light action. Don't really need anything heavier than that. As far as a spinning reel, 2500 series or larger reel, the biggest thing is the drag system. I'll get a 6 to 8 bearing drag, if not bigger, just because I'm fishing in November and December, and it could be 60 and sunny one day and be 20 blowing snow and have 6 inches of snow on the ground the next. So I want something that has a really good drag, that's not going to freeze up on me if the temperatures drop. Just have to take care of your equipment and all of that. And then basically on the reel, I'll put monofilament line. It floats, it helps with the drift. You can put a couple 100 yards of 8-pound test monofilament line. You can use Trilene, Stren, doesn't really matter brand wise. And then I usually tie that to a barrel swivel. It might be barrel swivel, like an 8, 10, 12, probably more of a 12 variety. And then I run that to 4 to 6 pound test fluorocarbon leader. As far as how long that is, that's going to depend on where the fish are, how deep the hole I'm fishing, and if the fish are moving when the line is passing through, if fish aren't really reacting with where I can see. Definitely have polarized glasses up there on Erie. They really do help out a lot to see where your bait is compared to where the fish are. So why do we use a noodle rod? Longer, lighter rods help absorb the power of the steelhead. 8 foot 6 inch to 10 foot 2-piece rod, medium light. Basically the same thing in the slide above. Those are just photos, the brands. Rods can cost $40 to $300. Some of the more expensive rods do have more sensitive backing, and you can feel it in the rod. You can feel the bite a little more sensitive on some of those days where it really does depend on how light they are biting. And the reels, you can be, $30, $40 upwards of $200 on those reels as well. So somewhere, just depends on if this is something that you're passionate about and that you really get into and enjoy doing. You might be, pushing the other end of the spectrum. If this is something you just want to try out, that's the best part about fishing. You can put as much into it or as little into it and get the same experience. As far as line, a fishing line, I usually use monofilament to the spool. Like I said, fluorocarbon leader, 4 to 6 pound test. If it's super light or if it's super clear conditions, these fish have seen everything thrown at them in the kitchen sink. So drop down to 4-pound test, and that might not even be light enough. I've never had to use 2-pound test up there, but definitely have fished in conditions where I've had to use 4-pound test. You have to play the fish a little bit longer. You have to play them, or you're going to break off a lot more. And it just depends on the water conditions. As far as weight, I will use as little weight as possible, but I'll definitely make sure the weight is on the line where it needs to be to get the fish in front of the fish's face. I generally like to use blackbird shot, it's called, anywhere from BB1 to BB4. I really do not use any of the shiny lead weight or anything like that either. I think it scares and spooks the fish. So I generally go with something that's blackbird shot, something like that. As far as an indicator, and Ari will talk about that here in a few, I just want it to be small enough to be seen by the angler, but not by the fish. And if you think about it, if you see those red and fluorescent green floating down through the water, I'm sure the fish is thinking, what is that? And they spook away from it. If you've ever fished for steelhead, you've seen this plenty. What I've tended to do lately is take a black permanent marker, color the bottom sides of all of those indicators. What that does is it looks like it's just, a leaf or something dark speck floating down the stream, and the steelhead are not as spooked when you do that. As far as bait, there's a bunch of different bait you can use up there. Probably my favorite is emerald shiners when you can get them from the bait shops. Just depends on the year whether there's a lot of bait out in the streams close shore or if they're going to be harder to find. Night crawlers have been my go-to the last couple of years. Usually use a whole night crawler on a small hook, let it drift down through the hole, and something about the night crawler, the steelhead can't resist it. Probably my favorite way to fish for them is the emerald shiner. My second favorite way is definitely night crawlers. You can also use artificial lures such as a woolly bugger, sucker spawn, and blood dot. Just like you would with a fly fishing setup, you can use the same type of setup with a new rod and spinning equipment. Barry, take it away.
Okay, thank you. All right, indicator fishing. Basically, it's a bobber. So it's the method of being able to let you know that a fish is doing something to your flies. There are a bunch that are over pictured on the right-hand side of this slide. What I actually use is pretty similar to the thingamabobber. So right below the traditional red and white bobber, those are called thingamabobbers. I use something that's very similar to that, but it's actually called a corky. As Chad mentioned, definitely pay attention to the size of your indicator. Number one, it can spook fish when you're presenting it, and then number two, if your indicator is too big for your rig, it's not going to be able to indicate anything because your rig isn't really pulling the indicator into the water in a fashion for you to be able to read it. That being said, when you are using your indicator, hook sets are free, okay? So if you see that indicator wobble or hesitate in a manner that you don't think it should, or even if it dunks, you need to set the hook. If you do go to set the hook on this indicator rig and there's not a fish there, try to use that as a cast so that you can get another drift in. Next slide, please. All right. This is the most important aspect of using the indicator is using it the way that you need to. Okay. So when you cast it out there, you're going to probably need to throw a mend in it, and that mend is going to physically move the indicator off of the water. You want to make sure that your flies or your bait are being presented to the fish first. Okay. So that's floating down, and then your indicator is coming down. Just as you see pictured right here. As to split shot placement, it's a very good idea to do as this picture shows. Okay, so your smallest split shot are going to be closest to the fly, and then make them bigger as you go up. As to indicator placement, don't use 1.5 times the depth of the water as a hard and fast rule. Okay, I find that I'm usually around 1 times the depth of the water, and it's typically because once you throw a couple mends in there with the flows that we have, that's all that you need to really get that drift going the way that you want. You don't want your flies dragging the bottom. If they can bounce the bottom, that's great, but you don't want to be dragging the bottom. Take your time getting the depth that you need with your indicator rig if you're not necessarily familiar with using them. Next slide, please. As to keeping eyelets from freezing, Brian, there's really not all that much they can do. Loon makes a paste for that I put on my eyelets. It doesn't work that great. I've heard of people spraying Pam on their eyelets too, but I don't know how super that is for the streams that you're fishing. Maybe
Mary,
yes.
I've used Vaseline a lot of the times too. I mean,
Really?
it works
Okay.
sometimes, but it just depends on really how cold the temperatures are. If we're talking where air temperatures are in the teens, I don't know very long if that water temperature's, in the around freezing point. It's not gonna. I don't think there's much that's gonna help that, but I have definitely used that. Lip balm's another one. Those types of things. Anything that prevents that buildup of the ice crystals forming in those eyelets.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. This is a really great slide. We'll start from the top and work our way down. Now, as Chad mentioned a couple slides ago, pay attention to what color your indicator is, and if you want to Sharpie the bottom of that black, you can do so. I know that there's many different colors and varieties of indicators out there. It's a matter of finding your preference. My go-to setup is going to be a corky indicator. I like that the bottom's a natural cork color. I like that the top is white, so I can fish bubble lines, and to me, the top of my indicator just looks like a bubble, and I would hope that, excuse me, the cork looks a little bit more natural to fish since it's a nice brown color. Plus, the cork floats really, really well. Now, as we get into material and sizes, you will see there's a dense foam indicator that's noted first. That's Ryan's preference, and I see a lot of people use the polystyrene foam indicators. They're great, and they're really easy for you to Sharpie should you want to do so. All right, and yes, your indicator should flow slower than the surface bubbles or debris. So, when you come up this fall and you are fishing when there's leaves floating down the stream and you have an indicator set up on your rod, you want to make sure that your indicator is moving slower than all the debris flowing down the stream. The reason for that is because the water on the bottom of the stream is actually going to be moving a little bit slower than the surface of the water. So in order for you to really have an effective drift, you need to match what's going on where the fish are, which is below the surface of the water. That water is moving a little bit slower. So that's where we're coming from when we say that. Now, as to when to change the length of your indicator to your flies, wait till you can see how it's performing. If you feel like you're not really taking bottom, then yeah, try to lengthen the distance between your flies and the indicator. All in all though, when I am using an indicator setup, I'm going to start out without weight on it, and I'm going to see if I can get a good drift and get my flies where I think they need to be. Then I'm going to start adding weight, and then I might also have adjusted the distance of my indicator to my flies prior to adding weight so that I had a little bit more leader to work with. So don't necessarily pinch on the split shot right away. I would wait till you can see what's going on first. That would be my best advice for anybody that's going to be fishing an indicator setup. Next slide, please. Okay, the dry dropper setup. This is definitely an extra bonus. This is a great way to fish. You could get lucky like Dave and end up hooking one on your dry fly, which is stellar. That's really cool. Basically what we're doing with the dry dropper rig is it's an indicator setup, but actually way more sensitive and therefore way more better. All right. So when I have on a big yellow dry fly, a yellow stimulator, and then I'm dropping my chartreuse copper john underneath it, I know that I'm going to be very sensitive and in tune to what's going on with that nymph. Plus, it's also far easier for you to cast it and mend it than using the indicator rig. Now, the dry dropper rig is what you want to pull out of the woodwork when it's low and clear water conditions. When you know that drifting those small nymphs under the indicator probably going to spook the steelhead, I would switch to a dry dropper rig. That's a great point on this slide. So underneath when to use it, when you see the steelhead suspended in the water, that's a fabulous time to use the dry dropper rig. Now, one thing that is a little bit unfortunate with the dry dropper rig, unlike the indicator, is that it's going to be a lot harder for you to kind of get your depth situated. Okay, so whereas with the indicator, you could maybe just lengthen the line, you are not necessarily going to have that easy of a time lengthening the distance of your nymph to your dry fly. But it's a very, very good rig to use because you can catch a fish on your dry fly, and it's a lot easier. It's a lot easier for you to see what's going on with your nymph by watching the dry fly versus using, say, like a round corky indicator or a thingamabobber. Now, if you're using those pencil indicators, what's nice about the pencil indicators, at least I think, is that you can kind of tip them in the direction you want to go. So those are very, very sensitive, more so than the rounded indicator. Now, I just want to go back real quick, if we could, Chad. There's two different ways to tie on your nymph, and that's what's pictured there. Okay, so you could tie on your nymph basically from the eyelet of the hook or from the bend of the hook. It's personal preference. I tie it right under the bend of the hook with an improved clinch knot because I can just tie it on like that. Next slide, please. Okay, reading the water. This is very, very important. 80% of the fish are in 20% of the water. This is extraordinarily true, okay? Don't be afraid to walk around. If you are not seeing fish in very shallow sections and you're like, I can't see anything and I can see everything, there probably aren't fish there. Don't be afraid to move along. 80% of the fish are in 20% of the water. And we're about to talk about some key structures that you can look for when you're walking these creeks so that you can fish that productive water. Before we jump into that, though, we're going to do a general overview of what to expect with the tributaries, okay? What's really cool about all of the creeks in Erie County, and like we're talking 20 Mile Creek out in your northeast, all the way to Elk Creek out in Girard, and then, if we were to jump over to even some of the Ohio rivers that are as well part of Steelhead Alley, there's lower, middle, and upper sections. Now, with all creeks, that's the truth, okay, but with some of our smaller creeks, there's not really enough public access for us to accurately say that to you. Now, as to what time of year we're in right now, okay, I'm sure some of you have been on Facebook and you're seeing that people are catching steelhead up here. They're all in the lower sections of the tributaries right now. So they're in the mouths, they're in the lower reaches, they're in that slow, slack water, and they're waiting for the water level to go up and the timing to be right and the temperatures to be right for them to head further upstream right now. But when steelhead are staging in the fall, the lower end of the tributary, so be above Route 5, right along the mouths and the beach. Next slide, please. Okay, middle of the tributaries. So we are not quite there yet with the push of fish, but the middle section of tributaries are very popular sections. They're the most fish waters, and that's where you're going to see riffles, runs, pools, and what's really cool is that in the fall, those are going to be areas where if you happen to be fishing the middle section, say of Elk Creek in the fall, and it's evening time and you're getting ready to walk out, you're going to see these fish that are staging and ready to move up, or you might even see small pods of fish. They're already starting to progress up these tributaries. So in the fall, when it starts to get dark out and you're heading back to the car and you hear all this splashing around you, it's fish moving up the system. All right. And where fish hold in these sections? Pools and riffles. One thing that is extremely important with all types of fishing, not just steelhead, fish the areas prior to stepping into the water. Okay, so don't just fish the best part of the pool. Fish the edges first and then work your way out into that pool. I can't tell you how many times that I have been super excited that I had this section all to myself and I kind of wanted to rush out into the riffles and I spooked a bunch of fish that were basically resting on the side or resting right before. You'll be really surprised to see how shallow of water these steelhead and brown trout will sit in the tributaries, but they really don't have much of a choice. So, walk slowly, pay attention. If it looks like fishy water, fish it before you step in it. Next slide, please. Oh, we have a fun little video here. So this actually took place last November, and it was an on the water part 2 in-person event of the introduction to steelhead fishing. And then that Looney Tune with the net and the steelhead is actually me. I got to net Sierra's first steelhead. It was awesome. She caught it on a rainbow trout game changer, which is a pretty neat little streamer that she caught it on. And where we are in this video is actually like the middle of Elk Creek. We are pretty close to the KOA campground. It's the Lake Erie Region Conservancy property, actually. I believe it's right on West Road. This section is super to fish, but you need to pay attention to where to fish. So as you can see here, there's a little bit of a shelf that's basically like at my shoulder height. And then it is a bit of a pool. All of those shelves that you see, you'll be surprised that you can't see the fish sitting right on that shelf. And you'd think that you'd be able to because the water is relatively clear. But if you can fish shelf lines or seams like that, that's a great place to fish. Okay, the headwaters. These are spawning grounds. Now, as Chad noted earlier, there's really not significant natural reproduction. But that being said, doesn't mean that it's cool for you to be going after fish that are actively on the red and trying to spawn. You're probably not going to solicit a bite anyway, and I'd be very surprised if you did, to be honest, because they're trying to do nature's calling. Now, back up to the headwater sections. These fish can travel miles and miles every evening, provided they have the right conditions to do so. Being that we don't get all that much rain, it's going to take a few months for them to progress up into the headwaters. That being said, once we get some rain, late November, December, don't be afraid to spread out, okay? You don't necessarily need to go fish down at Uncle John's campground at Elk Creek. The fish by November are well beyond and above Uncle John's campground. I would argue that you could start taking a look at some of the tributaries and headwater streams. Now, one thing that I'd like everybody to know is that if lower Elk Creek is like borderline blown out, you can probably go higher on Elk Creek and it'll be even less borderline blown out. And if you go high enough, it might be fishable conditions for you, okay? I know that Dee's put up some fabulous. So that map link that Dee just put in there at 7:54 p.m., that's going to give you all the public access in Erie County, okay? So if you come to fish lower elk and it's just not conducive for you, then get on that PFBC map website and take a look at public access that's well up above, okay? Maybe instead of fishing at that West Road property, maybe you can go up higher to Beckman Road, and it'll be a little bit different conditions. So don't be afraid to jump around if you do get up here and it's just not what you want. That being said, there's a lot of breweries in town, so don't be afraid to look those up too. But if you come and the creeks are blown out, go up higher, okay? Either go up higher or try to go to a smaller system, okay? So Elk's a big system and 20 Mile Creek is a really big system too. If those are not conducive to fishing, jump to something smaller. So what does that mean for me? That means I'm going to go fish the east side Mile Creeks, okay? So 4 Mile Creek is one such creek that's listed. It runs through Lawrence Park. I really enjoy fishing that creek. There's not a whole bunch of public access to it, but it is far longer than 4 miles long. So the Mile Creeks are actually notating the distance from the Boston store, okay? So that's where we're getting those numbers from. Like 20 Mile Creek out near, that flows through northeast Pennsylvania, the headwaters are well into New York, okay? So there's a lot of property. It's just a matter of taking a look if there's public access and going and investigating it, okay? Now, I would say that most of the time I'm fishing middle and lower sections. That's just where I have the easiest access just based off of my work schedule and what I'm up to. I know a lot of people that really only fish the beach at Avonia at Trout Run. That's okay too. Just don't be afraid to pull out a map though and take a look at some different areas, okay? Next slide, please. All right, reading the water. This is very important, and this is something that once you really start to look into it when you're out there fishing, it'll make a lot more sense, okay? So these fish are moving into our streams from the lake where they have lots and lots of room and they're going to be pretty deep, okay? So right now, charter captains in the lake, they're catching them at like 80 feet of water or so. They're coming into our creeks that are like 4 or 5 feet deep, okay? So kind of get in the mind of a predatory fish like that. They're not going to want to be somewhere that's super duper exposed, and if they are, they're going to spook rather easily. So as we're looking at this picture here, before I'm gonna really be getting into the water, I'm gonna be fishing the edges, okay? Now, at the riffle section and the pool section, you might be fishing a little bit differently. With the pool section, you might find that an indicator setup is a lot more conducive for what you're trying to do. If you're in a riffle section, you might be trying to tightline nymph. You can absolutely use an indicator setup wherever you want to in the stream, but depending on how you want to fish, you might actually be picking out specific sections of creek, and maybe if that pool doesn't hit the way you want, maybe you're moving on to the next one. However, I would like everybody to know that if you see somebody pulling steelhead in the pool above you, they just keep catching fish after fish, and you don't want to intrude, and you're fishing down below them, and you happen to be in a riffle section, there's going to be a surprising amount of fish that are in that riffle section. You can't see them, they feel very protected, and that's oftentimes where fish are going to jet to instead of being in the pool where everybody's catching fish. Riffles and pocket water are basically shallow areas, and that's an awesome picture. So this is a great picture of an angler that's actually Euro nymphing, and he's taking a look at the different seams that are going on in this riffled water, in this pocket water. He's taking a look at the way that the water is flowing, and he's kind of imagining what it's going to do to his nymphs, and if it's conducive to how he wants to fish, that's what he's doing, okay? Now, current seams are a very important thing to take a look at, and the best part about it is that more often than not, you're going to see bubbles or some type of indicator beyond just the water seems to be moving or looking a little bit differently on the surface. If you can find a bubble line, that's a great place to fish. If I can fish a bubble line into a pool, that's definitely going to be fish in there. It's where fast water meets slow water, and there's a lot of a swirling effect going on, and you really can't see the fish. So that's why current seams are very important. Now, especially with our slate creeks, so sometimes, as you saw in that video, it's like very ledgy rock that we've got going on, that is going to form all kinds of goofy current seams. And sometimes you'll actually see fish resting against the slate in a manner that you really can't get a drift to. So it's really amazing how well these fish can hide, but they're really going to be trying to rest and get out of the main current as much as they can, even though they're traveling tens of miles in order to make their annual spawning run. They're not really going to want to be working hard all of the time. That's why we mentioned earlier that some fish will be resting or staging, preparing to move up. They do need a break. So if there's a section of the creek that you go to that it's very fast water like this, and there's a million different current seams, and you don't know if you had enough weight on to get your nymphs bouncing where they needed to, don't be afraid to go find that slower water where those fish, once they've moved through, they're resting at. Next section, please. Perfect. Thank you. All right. Down on the bottom right, we can see fish, and then basically they've drawn current seams in yellow, and then there's some arrows there as well. What this illustration is trying to show is that fish are going to sit behind the boulder because it's a little bit of a current break for them, and then also shoves food from two different directions directly into their feeding lane. But there's also a little bit of a current break that's formed at the front of the boulders too. So if you can get to a section of stream, like there's a section on 4 Mile that I really like that's in Napier Park. There are a lot of boulders like what you're seeing in the bottom right. And what's neat about it is that you really can't see the fish until you hook them, okay? So if it's an area that's strewn with boulders and you can see that there's that soft pillow water around some of them and it looks fishy, don't be afraid to fish it. Now, that being said, remember, 80% of the fish are in 20% of the water. The illustration on the left is a great example of that as well. But just take a look how the fish are trying to sit where it's easy. They want to sit where they're not going to have to work that hard, and they want to sit where there's going to be food directly coming to them, okay? Those are two big things to keep in mind. Next slide, please. All right, different types of water. We've got runs and depressions. So when we say runs, that's going to be basically some sections where it's lighter water and then it's dark and you really can't see it. There's a good current going through there, but it's just dark and you're not too sure what's going on. It's a great place to drift your rig through. Wonderful. Now, why fish best when the runs have bottom structure? Rocks, ledges, logs, gravel. Bottom structure, anything that's going to break up the bottom of the creek so that you really can't see, okay? If you look down into the creek and you can just see smooth slate bottom, keep walking. You need to try to find some structure. The fish that are going to be out in the open are probably really spooked. You need to find the fish that are resting, are hiding. If you can find an undercut bank where a tree is really, like that picture on the right hand side, see how there's a tree coming right out into the creek there? That's a great hiding spot for a steelhead, okay? So these are not necessarily the stock trout that we go after in April. These are educated fish. They've been out in the lake for 2 or 3 years, and as Chad mentioned during his section, they have seen everything thrown at them, everything drifted by them. So think like there's anglers after you, and you're going to be looking for cover, structure, darker water. All right, reading the pools. Again, don't necessarily drift through the gut of the pool off the bat, okay? As this says at the bottom, spots to target out of the pool and tail out of the pool. Whichever one you're closest to, don't be afraid to start working it. But when I see a big pool, if I can help it, I'm actually going to be working it from top to bottom. I'm usually going to be out there with a Krelek streamer fly, so if I can drift it below me, that's my move. So again, I'll start top to bottom. I'll start with the edges, and then I'm going to start working out into the middle, and then I'm going to start working down the pool. So when you go fishing, you don't have to do this, but if you're looking to productively cover water, take a look at it and mentally gauge maybe, how many casts you have before you're going to take a few steps down. Next slide, please. All right. Be prepared to adjust. That's definitely an excellent tip. So this is Erie. The weather changes, the conditions change. The meteorologists are often inaccurate. So, if you come up here, that's excellent. So go ahead and check the USGS gauge. What I usually check is Brandy Run, which is a tributary of Elk Creek. I'll just take a peek at how that's running. I don't live out in Girard, so I like to generally know how the creek's running before I get in the car and invest that half hour. I'm on the east side, so it's far easier for me to fish the east side tributaries, but 20 Mile Creek unfortunately does not offer a USGS gauge. So Elk Creek is really going to be your best bet. Water conditions do change quickly here. One note on safety: if you are fishing and all of a sudden you notice that the water is starting to rise, it's probably raining, but the water is slowly starting to rise, make sure that you're on the correct side of the creek. Every year, anglers have to be rescued by a fire department, and most of the time it's because they got stranded during a rain event. So just be about yourself. Within that, if the mouth of the creek is blown out, try to head up to the headwaters. If you don't have access to the headwaters, try to find the next smallest creek. I believe there are 13 creeks in Erie County you can fish, but every single trickle of water in the lake is going to get fish, okay? So even if it's not necessarily stocked with smolts every year, every stream in Erie County gets some steelhead. Hot tip on here before we're all done with this one. As the water level drops, that is the time to go fishing. Okay, when the water's on the drop, that's the time to go after steelhead. Next slide, please. Tributaries and 2 nursery waters. You can fish trout run not in the nursery water but away from it. And again, I'm on the east side, so I like fishing the east side streams quite a bit, but the west side streams are absolutely gorgeous as well. Next slide, please. All right. Awesome. So when you pull up the map of the tributaries, what's really nice is that Route 5 and then Route 20 and then eventually I-90 actually cross all of these streams, which is pretty cool. So when people are saying like fish lower Elk Creek, mouth to Route 5. And this is just awesome. If you're fishing really high up on a creek, probably above I-90. That's what most Erie anglers mean. Next slide, please. Okay. This is a great breakdown of the stream sizes. As you can see, the mild creeks are some of the smaller creeks. They have a really quick runoff rate. That means that most of the time I need to be pretty stealthy when I'm on these streams. But I think that they can be great fun. If you go to Elk or Conneaut and it's blown out, definitely take a peek at your list of the small creeks, okay? Turkey doesn't really drain all that quick in my opinion, but like 4 Mile drops really quick. I love fishing that stream quite a bit. 6 Mile Creek is actually a private fishing club near the mouth. I don't know if steelhead really get above that waterfall. But 7 and 8 Mile are great creeks to fish. What's nice about going and fishing in Northeast is that you can very easily strike up a conversation with a fellow angler, and they might give you a hot tip or tell you where there's a pot of fish they just came from. And Crooked Creek has roped off nursery water as well. Can't fish in between the wires on Crooked Creek, but you can fish like the mouth and then above the wires. Next slide, please. All right. Fish USA has a great list of angler maps. That Fish Erie website, I misspoke. It's not Fish USA, it's Fish Erie. It's in partnership with Fish USA, but the Fish Erie website has loads of information on it. So you can actually go on there and basically print off PDF maps. I did that, and then I laminated them and 3-hole punched them, and I have basically a waterproof binder that I keep in the car with me. That way, if I go fishing and I didn't look at anything and I get there and it's just not conducive for fishing, I can pull out my angler maps and start paging through. The other thing on that Fish Erie website is there's fly recipes on there, and there is a regular fishing report. Chad does a great Northwest Region fishing report, but a more day-to-day one can be found on that Fish Erie website.
And Harry, the only thing I'll also say, Dee put in the chat that the new webcam at Trout Run. So if anybody's curious about what's the wave action, or is there people fishing the lake, you can go on and click on the link that Dee provided in the chat, and you'll get the link in the subsequent email that we send out within the next couple of days. But that's a great resource to see what the lake's doing, whether there's a bunch of people fishing the mouth of Trout Run. You could probably see some steelhead in Trout Run to know that maybe a run has started, what kind of conditions are there. So there's a lot you can gauge from that webcam, and it's sponsored or brought to you by Fish USA, Avonia Township, or Mill Creek Township. There's a bunch of different, I think Steelhead Association's also involved in that. So it's a really, yep. So I just wanted to say that, and we'll continue. We've got about 12 minutes remaining till 8:30, so we'll bust through these and hopefully have some time for some questions at the end here.
Know before you go. Always a good idea to check the weather prior to coming up. Because it's Erie, you could be coming up to snow when that wasn't even in the forecast. Or maybe it was in the forecast, but you had checked a day ago and now it's changed. So highly recommend checking the weather, temperature, the precipitation level. Again, that webcam is super, or taking a look at the USGS gauges. I don't pay attention too much to cloud cover. Do you, Chad?
I don't really find that it's that much of a hindrance or that much of a potential game changer. I've caught plenty of fish when it's been bluebird sunny day. Shade I think does, depending on where you're at in the water body, I think does help one way or the other. But as soon as the sun's come out, I've really caught a lot of fish. I think it also turns some of those minnow imitations a little bit brighter. It does affect things a little bit. Plus, if we're fishing November, December, if that water temperature's in the low 30s, an increase in 40 to 50 degree day air temp can do drastic numbers in that water temp. And, bump in water temp maybe by 2-3 degrees, those fish become super active. Those fish become a lot more acrobatic in when they're fighting compared to when they're lethargic and it's cold and they're cold and they really don't want to do much. So, it's funny that some of that stuff can change with just, with a little bit more sun, a little bit more heat, and a little bit more water temp increase. It does change the fishing and it does change the fishery a little bit.
All right, a thermometer. It can definitely be helpful so that you have an idea of tactics and kind of how the steelhead are feeling. You can use actually a meat thermometer that's circled in red, or you could get a fancy schmancy fish pond one that you see to the left. What's interesting is that the temperature is going to differ based on what stream you're in. It's pretty neat, but they're all kind of different freestone watersheds, basically. So freestone meaning that we need rain. We need rain in order for them to get a good flow going. As to temperatures, generally speaking, that optimal temperature range is when you're going to get those vicious storied steelhead fights. As it gets a lot colder, they're really, as Chad said, not going to be quite as acrobatic. But the colder it gets, the more precise you need to be with that presentation. They're really not going to, in my opinion, going to be willing to move as much, if at all, for anything. So make sure that you've got a good drift. Water flows, I feel like we've talked about the USGS a few times. I'd like to take a look at what's been going on for the last week, okay? Some folks have hard and fast numbers for what they're looking at on the gauge. I'm not going to say that that's wrong, but if we happen to have a super wet spring, that gauge might, according to your numbers, tell you it's blown out, but it's been up for so long up here that it's a little dirty, but it's not blown out. So the USGS gauges are very helpful, but I really recommend checking the Avonia Beach Cam and checking other methods before you cancel a trip because of the gauges. Okay, barometric pressure. Basically, the fish wants stability, has been my experience, okay? When we're really moving from different pressure systems, you are going to notice a difference in the fish activity level. I fish when I have time. That's the style of angler that I am. So I might take a glance at the barometric pressure, but it's really not going to inform my decision making all that much because I at work and have other responsibilities. For folks that really can take a look and pick and choose their days, I highly recommend getting a little bit more into the barometric pressure. Chad, is there anything you'd like to add on this?
No, I'm kind of like you. If I got the time to fish, I'm going to fish regardless what the pressure says. I mean, I think I've had really good days when it has been stable or things like that, but the barometric pressure is nothing that I really go and base my trip on one way or the other. I definitely do enjoy when those streams are dropping or on a soft rise. Definitely want to fish those conditions if I can. And, once, twice, maybe 3 times a fall, it happens that way, but the rest is, pretty much Lake Erie, low and clear conditions, depending on whether we've had a bunch of precipitation in the streams or not. So that's where it comes down to for me.
Cool. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Social media. It is the day and age of social media, for better or for worse. But you can use it to your advantage because a lot of people will give you a lot of information. What you see listed in bullet point format, I know the second one for a fact is actually a Facebook group, and there's like 30,000 members in that Erie PA Steelhead Fishing Reports. But there's a number of private Facebook groups. You just apply and answer a couple questions and they'll let you in. You can see pictures of people's fish. Sometimes people are very forthcoming and they'll tell you what they use and generally where they were at. But a lot of times you're just going to see pictures of fish, which is good because usually you can see the stream, what the fish looks like, and if there's a run going on. There's a lot of YouTube videos that are out there. You'll find that some of the guys that are posting in these Facebook groups are the ones with the YouTube page. But don't be afraid to look around. One thing I would like to mention though is that we have very pressured streams up here, as is. I would say that nobody really has a honey hole truly but respect your friend's spots. If your friend brought you somewhere that you wouldn't otherwise have been, have some reverence for that spot and for your friend for sharing it with you. Okay, knots to know. These are important knots. A nail knot is a very good knot to use. What you see on the top of those like nippers right there, and then what's also its own tool to the right, I know it as a nail knotty. It's a very helpful tool for helping you actually tie that nail knot. A surgeon's loop is a very helpful fly as well. I mean, a helpful knot as well to know. I recommend practicing these before you get on the stream, okay? Even though that animatedknots.com website is really fabulous and helpful, I promise you don't want to have to learn how to do a nail knot when you're on the stream and there's people fishing all around you. Okay, these are more so for bleeder to tippet connections or fly line to tippet. The ones that we were talking about prior, those were your fly line to your leader. So now we're actually on your leader. I use an improved clinch knot most of the time. If I do need to like add some more line onto my leader, I'm gonna typically be going with a blood knot. That's just what I know. But there's a lot of different knots out there, everybody. Find what works for you. If you grew up on an improved clinch knot, there's nothing wrong with still using that knot. If you want to learn another one, by all means do. Next slide, please. Okay, fish handling. This is very important to me, okay? I really like to see people handling their fish properly. Whether you are eventually going to take that fish home with you or not, that's completely fine. We do have a 3 steelhead limit. If you want to put fish on a stringer, do it. I have a lot of friends that love smoked steelhead. That being said, if you're going to release that fish with the intent that another angler can catch it, or perhaps it won't be caught again because it's just wised up enough, proper fish handling. Keep your fingers away from the gills. That's how these steelhead are going to breathe, okay? The lovely lady on the left, her name is actually Steph, and I had the privilege of fishing with her last November. You can see the way she's cradling the steelhead. Her hand is well behind the gill plate, and it's really underneath those pectoral fins, and then she's grabbing in front of the tail. That's going to support the fish from underneath, and she's got relative control of it in the back, okay? That's really your best bet for getting a nice grip and grin of your steelhead. But again, keep your fingers out of the gills, please. Another thing as well, there's a blog by Gink and Gasoline. It actually talked about steelhead mortality. When they're banging their head on those rocks because you beached them, you don't realize how much of a negative effect that has hours after you release it, okay? So if you're gonna be catching and releasing, I strongly recommend that you have a nice net with you. Do not beach these fish because you could actually be doing a lot more harm to them when you drag them on land and they're smacking into the rocks. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like to add to that, Chad, but that's all I have to say with fish handling and photos.
No, I mean, always keep them horizontal, keep them wet if at all possible. If you're going with somebody else, it's great to have somebody else that can take those photos. If not, keep that fish in the net. Try to get your phone set up somewhere. If you're going to do an auto take or a timer, just make sure that's done while the fish is in the water, while the fish is not struggling to breathe or anything like that. So do what you can to respect the fish. Hopefully it allows it to fight another day for somebody else's enjoyment. Never know who could be out there, whether it's a kid or somebody's first time. So we want to leave these fish just the same way we found them when we set the hook. So those would be the only things that I could add.
Thank you. This is a great resource page, and there are many more. But Great Lakes Steelhead Salmon and Trout, top left, that's by Carl Wexelman. He's actually in the PA Steelhead Association with me. He writes like he speaks, so it's very easy and informative. I very much like that. Right below it, you see Pennsylvania Angler and Boater. That is our state magazine. There's always tons of good info in there, and the best part about it is the articles are pretty darn short. So I really like flipping through that every time I get it. You're gonna get it every couple of months, but it's very informative nonetheless. And usually it is season specific, which is nice. There are awesome. So Salmon Trout and Steelheader is a great magazine. There's also Great Lakes Angler. That's another great magazine specific to our area. There's also Fishing Game East. That's another magazine. The book in the middle is by John Nagy. If you're interested in like flow rates, how long it takes for the creeks to clear out, and technical information, that's the book. The one furthest to the right is by Matt Sapinski. That's that Michigan steelhead guide that's an all lodge owner as well that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. Okay, further resources, in-person resources, people you can talk to. We have listed everybody but two. So there's two more in addition to everybody you see listed here. There's a Tudor Hook and Nook, and then a brand new shop called Fisherman's Haven. Any of these shops on here are going to be able to give you valuable information. Fish USA has pretty handy social media, which is nice. East End Anglers over on the east side by me. Follies and Campground is also a fly shop. So if you're into tying flies, don't be afraid to bebop in there and talk to whoever's at the counter. Next slide, please. Okay. First and foremost, don't be afraid to make mistakes, okay? We are fishing, and I would hope that for most of you, it's a leisure activity. For those of you like me that take it a little bit more seriously than that, again, we're just fishing. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Don't be afraid to switch up what you're doing. You know, Jonathan, I'll have to have Chad will take a look at that question as well. I've never experienced that before. I've experienced that for smallmouth in the spring, like I've hooked into one and then there's a chaser and then your buddy can cast out and catch that one, but I've never seen that with steelhead. Back to common mistakes. Don't wade too deep, okay? Just because your cast doesn't quite reach there doesn't mean it would be safe for you to wade out there. Be about yourself and pay attention to your surroundings. Don't be afraid to look around. Most of the creeks here have really great wildlife. So if you actually take the time to look up or just around, you might actually have company with you that you didn't even know. Set the hook at any disruption of the indicator. That's the hook sets are free, okay? If you see that indicator hesitate, stop, maybe it dunks, set the hook. If it wasn't a fish, that's okay. Go right into your next drift. Always set the hook downstream. This is very, very important, okay? So if the water is flowing this way, or flowing this way, the steelhead are facing upstream, okay? So we're flowing this way, and here's your fly drifting down. You want to set downstream so that you're not pulling the fly out of that fish's mouth, okay? So you want to set the hook downstream. Last but not least, and I think is the most important, have fun while you're out there, okay? If that means that you caught more crayfish than fish, that's okay if you enjoyed that, all right? Just make sure that you're trying to have fun. A wading pole, that's always, I know a lot of anglers that will actually have a wading pole with them, and it's very, very helpful. I have Patagonia Foot Tractor wading boots. They have these crazy metal bars all the way across them. Those coupled with my youth, I feel pretty safe when I'm out there wading, but I'm sure I will eventually progress and do a wading pole. If you are wading pretty deep, like waist deep, yeah, you should have a wading pole with you, but if it's if it's waist deep in Erie and it's really cold, I just think that you're putting yourself at unnecessary danger because most of the creeks here aren't even really that wide. Thank you. Next slide, Chad. Oh, what a great photo. This was last fall. This was the intro to steelheading on the water portion.
All right, folks, this is Dee again. I know we've had a lot of great information. We've gone a little bit over time here, but now, if you do have questions, put them in the chat box just like Jonathan just did. If you don't have any questions, you can feel free to go ahead and leave at this time. But before you leave, we do want to thank Chad and Ari again for their all their wealth of information, their expertise, and for being here this evening. But let's get to Jonathan's question. So Jonathan is asking, do you have any tips for keeping your feet warm in November and December? And we were just talking about that before the program actually started this evening, weren't we, Chad? Go ahead. You got some tips?
Yeah, I mean, it's something where you can layer up. You can have a couple pairs of wool socks. The biggest thing is you don't want to get sweaty out there either walking some of the distance. So just like anything else, you can buy, there's battery operated foot socks out there. There's battery operated heated vest and lung underwear type deals. So there's plenty of options out there. You can look on Amazon or any sporting goods store and look up all of that. That's kind of the biggest thing is when it's cold out, dress in layers, be able to take some off if you do get sweaty. Sometimes on some of these streams you may have to walk a little bit to find the fish. So just keep that in mind. But yeah, we literally were just talking about that before this program tonight. What are some ways to keep warm while we're out there steelhead fishing in November and December? So those are some of the tips that we can offer.
Well, along with the footwear, we have some other questions about, gloves, best cold weather fly fishing gloves or just gloves in general. Ari or Chad, any response on preference on gloves?
I'm very irresponsible with my hands in the wintertime. I have fingerless gloves, but when I go to start fishing, I usually take them off. I have seen some anglers with nitrile gloves. They say that just a few millimeters makes their hands a little warmer. But I do have fingerless wool gloves that I will have on, but when I go to start fishing, I kind of forget my fingers are cold until I need a break, and then I put them in my wader pocket.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same way. Fish Monkey, there's a couple different types of clothes or type of gloves out there. Fingerless gloves are definitely, I like having the feel to the line in some of the presentations when I'm bait fishing and spin fishing. So for me to have gloves on, I just feel like it's taking away some of my feeling and being able to do that. So a lot of times I'll just take a couple hand warmers and keep them in my pockets, and every once in a while try to stop fishing for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, or whatever it takes may be, and just stick my hands in my pockets, warm them up a little bit, maybe have some coffee on the shore, a thermos or something like that, just to try to stay as warm as possible. But I'm one of the guys that are out there from before daylight to I just enjoy steelhead fishing, so if I'm going for the day, I'll probably be dark to dark, just trying to find steelhead, and definitely just seeing what's out there and experiencing several different areas across the tributaries in Erie.
Thank you both for that. And then we have Dimitri who's asking about felt soles or spikes for boots.
I can let Ari, but with felt soles and the issues with aquatic invasive species and trying to keep them away from Erie tributaries and away from other areas in the state, Didymo, there's several other ones that are hard to keep out. So we generally recommend studs in your boots just to prevent the aquatic invasive species from traveling across the state. One of the ways to prevent that, if you do have felt, supposedly is freezing, putting your waders in a freezer and freezing them. That's the only way that kills some of that rock snot or didymo as well. So, those are some of the things you might want to keep in mind when you're considering between felt and studs. Do you have anything to add there, Erie?
Nope, I actually didn't. The invasive species didn't even occur to me for felt. I was just gonna say how gross they usually get.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing that you deal with up on Erie with the slate bottoms. I don't know of anybody that's never went up there and hasn't fallen once or twice. They're very slick, so having studs in the bottom of your boots definitely do help in those situations.
And no matter what, if you're talking about, aquatic invasive species, you need to make sure you're cleaning your gear anyway. So,
Correct.
yeah. But great advice, great tips. Ben's asking, where can skein be obtained?
I believe